and welcome to the Beauty Chronicles. I'm Meredith Jones, a professor of gender studies who loves popular culture.
And I'm Carla, Meredith's trusty sidekick.
In these Beauty Chronicles, we talk about all sorts of fascinating and sometimes grotesque things to do with cosmetic surgery, media, popular culture, celebrity, and much more. So, if you're confused by the Kardashians or baffled by Botox, this is the place for you. Connecting, recording.
Awesome.
Yeah. So did you manage to look at that video I sent you?
Yeah, I had actually seen it before. Yeah, it's pretty funny. Like, it was obviously written, like the script is obviously written by Kanye.
I know.
But I did feel like it's a little like, I mean, notwithstanding his Messiah complex, which seems pretty hardcore.
We should tell listeners that we're referring to a YouTube video of a gift that Kanye gave to Kim for her 40th birthday of a hologram that he'd had made of her dead father. And the dead father speaks a script that Carla's just correctly identified as having been written by Kanye. I mean, aside from the hubris,
which concludes with Kim's dad telling Kim that she married the most genius of men.
That's right. I think the quote is actually, you married the most genius of men. I'm imagining, because that most is used a couple of times in the video, I'm imagining it's some sort of family in joke, that the dad used to
exactly.
say that. But for Kanye to insert himself into a hologram of his wife's dead father speaking to her is, yes, Messiah complex and so much more. So, yeah, today I want to talk about this really complex set of things around Kardashians and Kristianity. And it's really hard, actually, because I've been following them for, 2 decades. And I've never thought about them in relation to Kristianity, except in a very fly-away, not thinking about it way. I've thought about them in relation to beauty, in relation to citizenship, in relation to cultural appropriation, in relation to capitalism. But I've never thought about them in relation to Kristianity until the new show on Hulu, where they seem to be pushing their Kristianity a little bit more than they used to. And I began to wonder why that was. And I'm just in the beginning of thinking how actually their Kristianity is fundamental to all those other things. So it's fundamental to their quintessential American story. It's fundamental to even to their notions of beauty, and certainly to their belief in themselves and their belief that everything they do is good and deserved.
Are you a regular watcher of that show? Did you watch kind of every episode?
I've seen every single episode, and several of them I've watched several times for my research. And Kristianity definitely comes up there, but I just never really thought about it. So, I think it was always there. It's just that for me, that was never my focus. And that's probably partly my background. I'm a kind of atheist with a bit of Jewish, a bit of Catholic, but the Jewish and Catholic are like 3-4 generations ago. I'm kind of atheist on both sides. So I don't actually understand a lot of Christian iconography. I don't, I've never been a churchgoer. And I think that's also part of being Australian, which you might relate to as well.
Yeah, sure. Australia's very sort of secular.
Yeah. Whereas I think that in the States,
well,
if,
in
for
the States,
example,
one needs to have a relationship to God. In the US, whether you believe or don't believe, or you're not sure, you still have a very firm relationship to God. God is a big deal in the US.
And isn't it interesting that I'm realizing that through the Kardashians? I mean, of course, I now realize, of course, there's never been an atheist president. There's, atheism is not really discussed. It's probably seen as a kind of devil worship, or maybe worse, because you're not worshipping anyone. So it's very, very interesting. And that's what I want to talk about today.
Awesome.
Right. So in one of the recent episodes, I think it was the third last episode of the final season, we get Kim saying, the past year really has been wild for our family, but all of this is part of our journey. God makes no mistakes. All of this is happening for us, for the lessons that we have to learn here on this planet. And I just find that fascinating because it's a way of speaking about their relationship with God that we hear continually. And I'll give you a few more examples. Well, before we get into examples, what if we go back to a kind of Kardashian genesis and talk about the dad, the dead father? It's a very, very Christian kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then the mum. So the Kardashians' dad, Robert Kardashian, usually in histories of the Kardashians and most popular books about them, there aren't that many, but most of the ones we have give this genesis of the dead father who was an immigrant or from immigrant stock, came to the United States, without a lot of money and made really good. And so then his daughters are the legacy of that. So they're only this, really one step removed from this Armenian heritage, immigrant made good story. But that's really not true at all. It's true in some ways. Actually, Robert Kardashian was born in Los Angeles. He was born in 1944, died in 2003. And he was a Christian, but also a born-again Christian. And he inherited millions, right? So he's actually not a self-made millionaire in the least. He inherited his millions from his dad, Arthur, who was also born in Los Angeles. So we're already going back quite a way from that sort of idea of, relatively recent immigrant made good. So Arthur Kardashian lived 1917 to 2012, also born Los Angeles, and he also inherited millions, but then built up those millions by selling packaged meat to the American military during World War II. Now, he inherited his millions from his dad, Tatos Kardashov. So Kardashian is obviously an anglicization of that name. He was born 1896 and died 1964, and he was born in Armenia. but interestingly didn't emigrate from Armenia to the States. Before that, as a teenager, he emigrated from Armenia to Russia. This was in 1913. And he did that as a religious refugee almost, or as a religious migrant.
Mm-hmm.
And that was because he and his community, his family, were part of a group of Protestant religious rebels who were known as jumpers. And they were known as jumpers because they would express their religiosity in church by jumping up and down, by jumping into the air. So we've already got a kind of hand-clapping, performative Christianity that was going to suit itself quite well to moving to the States, possibly. Their leader in Russia was a prophet, and he prophesied that great troubles were coming for the Armenians, and that Armenians needed to move across the deep sea. And he actually pointed to the west coast, I believe, of the United States on a map and told people to go. So many of them did, including Tatos's parents, and I believe he followed them on the next boat. He became a millionaire through garbage collection. So the Kardashians went from millions in garbage collection, building up that millions through meat packing, further building those millions in white collar, because Robert Kardashian was a media lawyer. And then now, so you could say they went from blue collar to white collar. And I was trying to think, what collar are they now? Because they're obviously not white collar anymore. And I reckon they're diamond collar.
Diamond collar. There you go.
Diamond collar. Yeah. And there are enough pictures of Kim wearing diamond chokers to, back me up on that one.
When Tatsos?
Yeah. The great granddad.
Yeah. When did he leave Armenia?
Tatos.
Tatos.
He left Armenia for Russia in 1913.
Okay, so I wonder if what was going on in Turkey at that time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I should have said Prophet was right, because the Prophet had foreseen the Armenian genocide. And the people who remained both in Armenia and in that part of Russia, they faced a genocide. They faced a genocide of such magnitude that genocide and Holocaust historians, some of them, well-respected ones, say that the German Nazis got some of their ideas from the ways that genocide was carried out. Yeah. So it was like a precursor to the Holocaust. About 1.3 million dead, probably. So no small numbers whatsoever. Very, very serious. So amazingly, that prophet was right.
Didn't one of the Kardashians start
her own church?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get to that. So that's Kris Jenner. That's the mum, the momager. And she began Cal Community Church, Californian Community Church. But before that, I want to talk about her genesis. So one of the things, all these books about the Kardashians, and I might point out they're all written by men, right? We don't actually have a popular book about the Kardashians written by a woman. So these mainstream kind of histories of the Kardashians, they're all written by men, and they're often quite misogynistic, but that's another story. Anyway, they don't much mention Kris Jenner. They'll say, she was kind of an air stewardess who got lucky by marrying this rich guy and then turned into, and she, you know, she was a bit of a slut, and then she turned into this mummager and has, you know, pimped her daughters out, right? That's putting a really, but really that's what these misogynist texts do say. That's the subtext. So Kris Jenner has her own really interesting Genesis story in relation to religion as well. She was raised Presbyterian, but was largely unobservant. Interestingly, she says that she first began to pray when she was living in New York in her early 20s, and she used to do that at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And her prayers were that she would be transferred to Los Angeles. By the way, she was working as a air stewardess at the time. She prayed that she'd be transferred to Los Angeles so that she could spend more time with her boyfriend, Robert Kardashian. Okay, so really interestingly, her religiosity, and this is from her memoir, by the way, so she describes her religiosity as really kicking in relation to that relationship. Yeah. So she wrote, Robert was a born-again Christian. He prayed before every meal and before each and every business meeting. He even carried a Bible with him. I had grown up going to a Presbyterian church on Sundays and holidays, but I was never really devout, especially not as devout as Robert. And then she actually goes on a little bit later in that same paragraph, and she says, he even carried a Bible with him with a special leather cover, hand-tooled, with his initials engraved on the front. And I find that really fascinating because in that moment, what we're getting is really the first iteration of Kris Jenner's religiosity in line with the relationship that then created the dynasty, but in line with exclusive luxury. So it's not any old Bible. It's a very special Bible. Leather bound and hand tooled with his initials. Yeah. So, and I think this carries on into the brand of Christianity that we see with them today, which is around excess and luxury. Kris then goes on a bit more, and I haven't been selective here, right? What I've got are most of the quotes from her memoir that are about religiosity, right? Next one. She started going to prayer meetings with Robert at Pat Boone's house in Beverly Hills. The minute I walked into Pat Boone's big, beautiful, sprawling house in Beverly Hills, I met the most welcoming, wonderful, magical group of people I'd ever known in my whole life. Let me tell you who those people were. Zsa Zsa Gabor, Doris Day, Priscilla Presley, and Glenn Ford. So her religious conversion went hand in hand with an adoration of these incredibly famous Hollywood figures. And it happened inside a big, beautiful, sprawling house in Beverly Hills. So need I say any more? You know, a little bit later in the memoir, she says, it was 1988 and a few of my Bible study girlfriends were having their boobs done. Pretty soon, everybody was having boob jobs. Of course, I decided I needed a boob job too. I had 4 kids and the boobs were looking like they could use some perking up, so I scheduled the surgery. So here we're beginning to get the particular Kardashian brand of beauty being associated with the religiousness and with religious practice. That is the first mention of cosmetic surgery in that book, and it comes hand in hand with Bible study. So we might, you know, an old-fashioned sort of view of Christianity might think that, it doesn't value surface, that the soul is different. Yeah, so we've got this really interesting connection in Kris Jenner's memoir between fame, wealth, Hollywood, and a particular kind of manufactured beauty.
And spirituality.
And spirituality. And then what I was just, my eyes were dropping out of my head as I came to the final chapter in her memoir, which is titled The Epiphany. In this memoir, in this final chapter, she says she's describing a neck lift that she decided to have. I never imagined that a neck lift would be a transcendental, life-changing experience for me at the age of 55. So it's quite amazing the language she's using, the epiphany, transcendental, life-changing. And what she goes on to describe is not that she saw God during the anesthetic or that, Mary visited her to tell her what a beautiful neck she had or whatever it was. It's actually about the love of her family gathering around to support her in this time of need. So I think what we've got there is also perhaps this beginning of this pattern that seems to then follow through the series of the Kardashian family being somehow slightly saintly. And we saw that in the very last episode of the last season on the Hulu show. I don't know if you saw it. I have to watch it again because it was quite extraordinary. And
this is the new season? The
new show? The new show, yes. What's
the new show called?
The Kardashians.
Okay. Whereas Keeping Up With is the old show.
That's the old show.
Okay.
So the Kardashians now has 3 seasons, and the very last episode of the most recent season shows Tristan Thompson, who is Khloe's ex-partner, caught cheating on her twice, at least once on camera, father of her first child, also father of her second child. While that second child was being gestated with a surrogate, he was caught on camera cheating. It's so incestuous. He was caught on camera cheating with one of Khloe Kardashian's youngest sister, Kylie's best friends, called Jordan Woods. So it's very incestuous. So he's kind of a baddie, and we had some quite comic moments where he attended the birth of their second child, and Kim, to her credit, would turn to camera occasionally with a slitting the neck motion, as if to say, I want Tristan dead. Like, how dare he even be here in this room? And she was doing that to camera while he was there in the either the delivery room or perhaps the post-birth room. I can't remember.
I thought she'd turn to camera and tell him to cut.
No, she was saying, I want to slit his throat. Yeah, it was really, really powerful.
Holy.
Raw. We don't often get raw stuff on the Kardashians anymore. So what I'm trying to get at is Tristan's a real baddie, right? Tristan's a dirty dog. But on the last show, they announced early on that there'd been a terrible tragedy. And definitely it's a tragedy. Tristan's mum had died. So that the other grandmother of Khloe's 2 children had died. And apparently Khloe was very close to her and spoke to her every day. That's what she said on the show. And what we then saw was Tristan, Chris, Kim, and Chloe all getting onto Kim's private jet, flying to Canada in order to deal with this emergency. And they then talk about all the work they did. They say that they packed up her condo. They say that they are going to make sure that her other son, who has a serious disability, is going to be cared for, etc. But what we get in that episode is them really presenting themselves as kind of saintly, maternal mother figures, literally flying to the rescue. And this is a man who's a multimillionaire in his own right. And yet he makes a speech on the plane about how he couldn't do it without them, about how that he loves them, etc., etc. So I'm really, really fascinated by this way that they're beginning to represent themselves as very, very goodly, saintly, doing good works. And I think they're being very, very canny, because there were several things in this last series, especially Kim perhaps doing the dirty on Kourtney by taking her ideas around the Dolce & Gabbana shoot, and Kourtney really taking Kim to task for being greedy, for doing things just for money, etc. And note Kourtney's not on the plane, right? So we've got this kind of reframing of Kim as saintly, as of being there for her sister, being there even for the man who she wanted dead.
Sorry, it's just an aside. The Dolce & Gabbana idea stealing, was that from the previous series, Keeping Up with the Kardashians?
That's this latest series, okay. And that's another whole story where, where we could talk about that separately. But basically, Kim was invited by Dolce & Gabbana to curate an entire show, very prestigious, et cetera, and she flew to Italy to do it. The problem was that Kourtney, only a few months earlier, had let Dolce & Gabbana host her wedding in Italy. And of course, they hosted it in true Dolce & Gabbana style, with all the crucifixes and Madonnas and lace and mini dresses and massive amounts of bling. For Christians, they used a hell of a lot of, for non-Catholic Christians, they used a hell of a lot of Catholic iconography in that wedding. And Kourtney got very upset and feels that Kim stole her wedding ideas. And Kim made a huge amount of money out of it, whereas Kourtney, I don't know, may have had
to pay for it.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Oh, the intrigue and drama.
So Kourtney's really, really angry with Kim about that. And that's part of their lifelong feud. Those two sisters are the two sisters who have the most sibling rivalry, and are always accusing each other of stealing stuff, not respecting each other, of not listening, of
Is Kourtney the model?
No, Kourtney's the oldest.
Okay.
And she's kind of the least modelish.
Okay.
She's the tiny one. If she were Barbie, she'd be petite Barbie.
Okay.
She'd be the little tiny one. Yeah.
So they're so just to get back to the sort of the final part of this, like the most recent series, they're kind of these angels flying in.
In a way, yes. I think they are. In some ways, they're refashioning themselves, maybe as angels. I hadn't thought about angels. But if we think of other groups of sisters, they're not necessarily doing anything new. I'm thinking of like the Virtues, the Furies, the Sirens, these Christian or mythological groups of sisters or groups of women who are related in some way, who are matriarchal, incredibly powerful, supernatural, and in the case of the virtues, they're good. They're really good. A really good writer called Ruth Block has written that the Protestant Reformation began to place less emphasis on Catholic qualities and actually began to criticize that monastic ideal of celibacy and began to stress other individual virtues of piety, temperance, frugality, and work. Clearly, the Kardashians don't pretend to be frugal, but they do perform those other more contemporary kind of virtues, especially work. One of the things I was really disappointed by in the new series on Hulu is that they kept on pushing this, we work so hard, we stay up all night, we work out, we deserve all of our money, we deserve all of our wealth because we're such hard workers. I had really hoped that they would go full goddess. I wanted them to embrace the goddess, say we are supernatural creatures. To me, that would have been far more interesting than just more rehashing of this ridiculous American belief that anyone can be president if they work hard enough. But of course, part of their Christianity is God gives us this because we worked so hard for it.
But it's also like the basis of American Christianity. Like it's asking them to be goddesses is like asking them to kind of reconfigure the world.
Exactly.
Like, if you're a good person, you'll make money.
Exactly.
God will bless you with fortune. And if you haven't been blessed with that, then it's because there's something wrong with you. And that's not our responsibility.
Indeed. Unless we choose to give you some charity.
Well, if we choose to give you charity, that's then, our...
That's literally your charity. That's part of your virtue. If I give charity, that's part of my goodness. That will elevate me. Yeah, I was extremely naive. I saw the trailer for the new Hulu show. It had these massive sets, literally as big as you could be. They were jet hangars. They were the hangars where Kylie and Kim keep their private jets. And I thought, wow, we're going to go there. We're going to, get something different. But of course it wasn't. And I was silly to hope for that. But that was my fantasy. Yeah. Interestingly, the other really interesting thing to do with Christianity and the Kardashians is that they are a matriarchy. And in many ways, at least early Christianity worshipped Mary more than anybody else. So Kim said this really interesting thing in one of the shows in 2012. She said, and how old would she have been then anyway? She was only in her early 20s, no children yet. I think if I'm 40 and I don't have any kids and I'm not married, I would have a baby artificially inseminated. I would feel like Mary, like Jesus is my baby. And there's so much kind of scientifically and theologically just incorrect about that, that it's really funny. But it's pretty amazing that she said such a thing. And, we've since then seen all of them except Kendall, who's the supermodel, give birth, have babies, multiple babies. And in some ways, I don't know, I just see Kylie's babies in some way, especially the first one, as kind of virgin births because she was so young I think she was 19 for the first one. There was a boyfriend that we knew about, but he was never on the show. He's a famous rapper. He was never on the show, and we knew he didn't live with her. She also kept the pregnancy secret. So she went through a whole season of not having her body on camera. And she kept it really well secret. She did a really good job. It wasn't on social media either. And so when she gave birth finally, it was kind of like a miracle, like a social media miracle. And yeah, there was recognition then of the boyfriend, but in the same sort of way that, you know, Joseph might have been recognized as sort of the father, but not the father. Really, she did it by herself, and it just happened. In stark contrast to the very first birth that we saw on the very first, in the first iteration of the Kardashians, in Keeping Up with the Kardashians, which was Kourtney giving birth to Mason. She gave birth on television and she pulled him out herself, which was an extraordinary moment.
What?
Yeah.
You saw the birth, like you were in the...
Yes. We didn't see baby coming out of vagina. We saw a side shot. But we saw her family members' faces as they saw baby coming out of vagina, particularly Chris, who you'd expect not to look so shocked, having given birth 6 times herself, but she looked genuinely appalled, I think.
Were they in a hospital, or was it like a pool,
in a
like
hospital.
home birth? Or
no, in a hospital. And then the doctor says,
on a table, in a pool?
No, on a bed.
Okay.
On a bed. And the doctor's their family doctor, who's appeared in many shows, and he must be ancient by now. And he says to Kourtney, by the way, there's no screaming, there's no pain evident. I assume because of drugs, I don't know.
Okay.
You know, he's saying push, push, and everyone's saying push, push. And then the baby's, I think, you know, at least halfway out. And he says to Kourtney, would you like to reach down and pull your baby out? So she reaches down, pulls the baby out, and brings her up to her to rest on her chest.
Okay.
And at that point, you know, it's a real goddess moment. It's like a maternal goddess moment. She pulls her own baby out.
Maybe that's something they do now with birth. They let the mother pull the baby out.
Yeah, I've never seen it again, but I know she did it with subsequent babies, and yeah, I'm sure it's a thing. So, but it was certainly the first I'd ever seen of a baby being born in that way. So yeah, we've got, then we've also got these other kind of new forms of birth with all of them. So we've got two of them have used surrogates. So these are in turn a kind of virgin birth, a variation on a theme. They've used IVF up the wazoo, you know, that, you know, all of them have had a go of that, except for the youngest, I assume. These embryos created out of body. And then, of course, we've got all of these televisual birthing moments of different sorts. A really interesting thing on the latest season as well was Chloe talking openly about the difficulty of bonding with her youngest child because he came from a surrogate.
Interesting.
And yeah, that was not something Kim ever spoke about. She has 2 children by surrogate, but never mentioned that. Maybe it wasn't an issue for her. But for Chloe, it certainly was, and she spoke openly about it. And as usual, Chloe's the most open. I'm sure I know there's a lot she keeps secret, you know, keeps off the cameras. But, and we find out about it later, years later. That's the way I know, not because I have any secret insight. But yeah, surrogacy groups were very, very positive towards Chloe having been open about that, because we think of surrogacy as being, well, I don't, but our culture thinks of surrogacy as being something quite easy for the non-birth mother. You know, she just gets a ready-made baby and it's wonderful. But bonding is hard with a baby you haven't gestated. And of course, there's the Kardashians never mention, well, there is some mention of the surrogates themselves, but, you know, we know that white women using black women as their surrogates is incredibly controversial and problematic. They're paid, of course.
Do you see the surrogates in the show?
No, we don't see the surrogates. But
so we don't know. They know their ethnicity.
For some reason, I do know that the woman, that Kim's surrogate, at least for one of them, was a black woman. We don't know anything about Chloe's surrogate, as far as I know. Yeah, Kim may have used the same surrogate for both births. I don't know. So that's yet another, potentially yet another form of their cultural appropriation, is using black women's bodies to, you know, bear the gestation, the stretch marks, the pain of birth, etc., etc.
Did you say they were moving away from having rapper boyfriends?
It's watch this space, because as far as I know, Kim is currently boyfriendless. She had Pete Davidson, who's whiter than white. He's as pale as me. And he had dyed white blonde hair for a while. He was her sort of accessory, her white man accessory at the Met Gala when she dressed up as Marilyn Monroe, and she couldn't have looked whiter than that. And yes, but as for others changing to white boyfriends, it's a matter of wait and see. Yeah, or who will Kim's next boyfriend be? It's the world.
Maybe they'll have to start having white surrogates.
Well, the surrogate doesn't affect the race of the baby, because the surrogate doesn't provide the egg.
Like, surrogate has to gestate the baby. It's given the baby its blood.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And there's mitochondrial DNA as well. So surrogates are not just vessels.
Yeah.
Surrogate women's DNA, I believe, does end up in the baby, whether or not their egg was, you know, when their egg has not been used. Yes, that's a fascinating thing. DNA is also passed through breast milk, by the way, which I find fascinating, given the incredible whiteness and racism of, for example, the British royal family. We only have to go back 2 generations to find out that all British royals were breastfed by black nannies.
Interesting.
So their so-called blue blood is, well, we know it's an absolute nonsense, but, you know, it's a fucking nonsense. Yeah. Anyway, let's talk about a little bit more about Kardashians and Christianity. As we know, Kim married Jesus. You know, she didn't actually end up giving birth to Jesus the way she thought she would in her early 20s. But she did marry Kanye, or Ye, or Yeezus, as he likes to call himself. That man then brought her father back in a kind of weird sort of second coming, reincarnation, yeah, sort of a reverse second coming. Before that, the Kardashians had used mediums to try and contact their dead dad, and always kind of evoked him in their prayers and talked about how he was there with them, which is also pretty extraordinary to me to hear that from Kris, who had actually divorced him before he died. but then was very happy to turn him into the kind of family saint. And if we look at the way he defended OJ, then he was clearly not a saintly person. You could say that any defense lawyer, any lawyer at all, who's doing their job is not going to be saintly, because they have to defend, to the best of their ability, even if someone has done a crime. But yeah, not a saintly person. And I think the fact that he's dead is absolutely central. Kris Jenner would not be who she is if he was not dead, despite having, sure, she'd already divorced him. But without him being this sort of quintessential, almost holy figure, I don't think that they would have really had the cultural wherewithal, the cultural capital to do what they've done. Yeah. Kris Jenner's Instagram profile she describes herself as mom, manager, momager, lover of life, and lover of Christ. So it's pretty central when you put it as part of your Instagram profile. And she has helped found a church, which is called Cal Church. And you can look it up. It's calchurch.com. Have a look at that website and tell me what you think, Carla.
One sec.
calchurch.com.
Like what many churches are a money-making scheme.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking at it.
Okay, attend in person, watch live, watch on demand.
I see, yeah.
Come, like, different ways to engage. Like, I don't see Jesus anywhere. It doesn't say what kind of church it is. It doesn't say it's Christian.
That's interesting. You're quite right, but I was angling for something else, Carla. I was angling for what you think of it as, like, for example, the images and the design. And I'll tell you why. Because I would expect, given Kris Jenner and her aesthetics and everything we know about her wealth, her aesthetics, etc., I would expect an absolutely beautiful website. And instead we get what looks to me really cheap.
Yeah, it looks like a WordPress.
Exactly.
WordPress
I mean,
template.
the one under clubs, like, who hasn't seen that image before with all the hands holding each other? These are generic, cheap images, and it's a cheap website. And I think that's deliberate. I think it's very deliberate to say this is an ordinary church. This is not a Kris Jenner church, even though we know it is. So it's kind of in line with the way that the Kardashians and Jenners are always talking about how hard they work. It's making the extraordinary ordinary and making you feel that you can be part of it, even though there's no way you ever can. Sure, you can watch online, join, give, but you're never going to be like them, because that's actually luck. They're the way they are, not through merit, but through luck. And much as they might say, God did this, God has put me on this path, and they do say that, God has given me all of this. The reason they've got all what they have is luck, because plenty of people work a lot harder than them and don't have that sort of wealth.
They do have a link to the company that created the website at the bottom of the page.
Oh, yeah.
And that also looks like, it looks like they specifically market to churches.
Yeah, for a budget.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to
Okay.
maybe we can end with me reading a couple more Kris Kardashian quotes from her memoir.
When was her memoir published?
2012.
Okay.
So we're due for an update. So this is talking about how motherhood, business and wealth and fame and God are all intertwined in this family's story. She says, all I ever wanted to do in my life was be a wife and mother and have 6 kids. Well, I'm living my dream, and I'm lucky enough for whatever reason to be living it on life's biggest stage, television. I love what I do, and I thank God every single day for these blessings. He obviously has a bigger plan for my life. It's another really interesting one as well. She writes towards the end of the book about having found her dream home, which is obviously not the home she lives in now. I think she's been through a few since then. But on finding this dream home, she says, I knew it was God who had taken me on a path, and I had to put one step in front of the other to live in house after house after house for a very important reason. This house was more than a house. This house was a stage. This was the house that everybody would fall in love with. This was a house dying for an audience. I never could have dreamed of how large that audience would become. So we have her personifying a house and also bringing it in as a stage, as a kind of almost as a creature that has desires, that has suffered before she came to live in it, before her and her family came along. But we have also got this notion of house as stage, and that kind of epitomizes the Kardashians, because that's what family-based reality TV does. It makes house become stage, and it conflates the public and the private. But I think that most importantly for Kris Kardashian, all of that was God's will, right? She just put one foot in front of the other on that path, going through that terrible hardship of living in grand home after grand home after grand home before finally finding the ideal grand home. She was following a preordained path. And the good servant of God got just what she wanted.
But when did she start her church?
Sorry, don't know. There's a little story there because she kind of rescued the pastor who runs that church. He'd been expelled from another church because he had an affair, and he then married the woman he'd been having the affair with. And the story is that Kris Jenner tracked him down. He was working in a Starbucks, and she tracked him down and said, would he like to start this new church that she was founding? And one of the parameters of this new church is that they don't judge. Everyone's welcome. All sinners are welcome. And of course, Kris Jenner is very open about having cheated on Robert when they were married.
Right. I'm looking at the website. It says that they kind of started Bible study in 2009 and then did weekly services in 2010. And then she publishes this memoir in 2012.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, it's all trying to get people to give it to the church.
Intertwining of money and church is, just,
well, it's America.
It's not. They're not even two separate entities.
Yeah,
capitalism and the church are completely intertwined. And then, of course, now we have Kanye West's Sunday service.
Good God.
Gospel and rap worship with celebrities, with an audience. So there are the participants at Sunday service, but then there's also always an audience, which is often behind a fence. He's begun holding Sunday services at concerts and at festivals, and they're massive draw cards. There could not be more of a conflation of religion and popular culture. And trust Kanye to do it on the biggest scale imaginable. They have costumes are made, all the colors are art directed. It's all built for Instagram, and it's this performance and an experience that is both real and digital. Of course, it began to happen during COVID. So that's relevant. It's a performance of spirituality, of moral worth. So celebrities love turning up to show, you name a celebrity, they've been there, and make sure they get their picture on Instagram. But it's also a performance of beauty. So whether the beauty is in the particular configuration of people or the colours or the beautiful people who are present. And it's a kind of weird performance of unity and belonging, but also of disunity and not belonging, because all we can ever be is observers. You need an invitation into this church. Kris and Kim have both recently had these complete body scans, plus MRIs, plus etc. They're these, scans that are meant to pick up very early cancer, very early problems. And after Kris's one, they said to her, the doctor said to her, you're in great shape. From looking at your scans, I would have thought you were in your 40s. And she's nearly 70. So she was thrilled and, pretty much, says she's going to be immortal. But one day, of course, one of them is going to die. And we've not yet seen anyone in this family die. They've got the dead father as the patriarch. What I think will be amazing is when Kris dies. Kris has bought a massive mausoleum in, I think, the Hollywood Cemetery for them all to go in. There might be statues of them on, we could have statues on top of the mausoleum.